Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this June CRAE webinar. I'm Anna Remington, Director of CRAE, and I'm delighted to see so many people here for this afternoon's talk. Here at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education, we're a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based within the UCL Institute of Education and part of the Department of Psychology and Human Development. We aim to conduct high-quality, cutting-edge research, but also to ensure that the results of that research reach those who stand to benefit from them. The CRAE webinar series is one aspect of that, allowing people both within and beyond academia to hear from some of the key researchers, practitioners and advocates in the field. And through everything we do, we take a participatory approach, which means we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives. And at this point, I'd like to thank our funders, supporters and team members who contribute to our work and make everything possible. In particular, a special thank you to Pears Foundation for their generous ongoing support that underpins everything that we do. And today I'm delighted to introduce Holly Radford, who will be giving today's talk. Holly is an autistic PhD student at the University of Portsmouth, working with Dr. Stephen Capp. Holly is researching how autistic people use non-verbal behaviours during social interactions and how this is interpreted by others. Please do put any questions for Holly in the Q&A box, and then CRAE's Communication and Engagement Officer Brian will ask her as many as possible at the end. And you can also post these questions anonymously if you prefer. And now I'm going to hand over to Holly, who will be talking about something quite appropriate for a webinar on Zoom: non-verbal behaviours and first impressions during video calls between autistic and non-autistic adults.
Thanks, Anna, and allow me to share my screen and can you see that okay? Is that working?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Fab. Thank you for having me today. Yeah, I'm Holly Radford. I'm a PhD student at the University of Portsmouth. And today I'm going to be talking to you about non-verbal behaviours and first impressions during video calls involving autistic people. The first thing that I want to mention is that I will be using identity first language in this presentation, and that's to respect the preferences of the autistic community. I first want to talk about the double empathy problem because it's an important way of framing social interactions that I'm testing in my research. And it's this idea that misunderstandings between autistic and non-autistic people are a result of bi-directional difficulties in understanding one another as a result of the differences in experiences and perspectives of the world that autistic and non-autistic people have. And it's not due to any deficits located within the autistic person. If social deficits were located within an autistic person, within autistic people, we would expect to see these difficulties magnified in interactions between two autistic people. But actually, research shows us that interactions between two autistic people are as successful across a number of measures as interactions between two non-autistic people. Interactions between autistic and non-autistic people, however, seem to be less successful or have less positive outcomes. And this supports the idea of the double empathy problem, where the difficulty is located within the interaction between two differently disposed actors, as opposed to being located within the autistic person. So the idea of neurotype matching, rather than being autistic, is a better predictor of interactional rapport, of feelings of closeness and liking and connection, and observer-rated interaction success than neurotype itself. And I'm testing this idea in my study by looking at how the neurotype of the interaction partner, or the match of neurotype between partners, influences non-verbal behaviours and first impressions. I am not looking at autistic people's behaviour in isolation. So why is non-verbal communication important? When I talk about non-verbal communication, what I'm referring to are specific behaviours like facial expressions, for example, smiling, frowning, body language, for example, somebody folding their arms across their chest, gestures like head nodding, head shaking, shrugging, and eye gaze, in particular, whether eye gaze is directed at the partner or away from the partner. And these behaviours are associated with many social outcomes. For example, people who produce facial expressions that are recognisable and congruent with a social context are more likely to be socially integrated and better liked. Higher levels of mutual eye gaze, so when interaction partners are both looking at each other at the same time, is associated with better first impressions and better social judgments. Higher levels of smiling and higher levels of mutual eye gaze and being more facially expressive are associated with being better liked. And some gestures, body position and mutual gaze are associated with rapport. So rapport is this feeling of closeness and connection with another person. So in the general population, non-verbal behaviour is related to social judgments and first impressions. However, autistic people show some differences in non-verbal communication which may impact these kinds of social judgments and outcomes. Some of these differences, for example, might include differences in eye gaze. Some autistic people show a reduced or different pattern of eye contact, which can include less mutual gaze, less attention to faces. And although for the general population, mutual gaze, so partners looking at each other at the same time, is associated with higher levels of rapport, for autistic people, mutual gaze doesn't seem to be related to rapport. So rapport can be high without high levels of mutual gaze, and this suggests that autistic people might use and judge nonverbal cues differently. Autistic people may also show differences in facial expressivity, depending on the context. There doesn't seem to be much research consensus about this at the moment. Some studies show similar levels of facial expressivity between autistic and non-autistic people. Some studies show differences, and some of this seems to depend on the context. One study, though, has found that high levels of autistic traits are associated with lower levels of expressiveness, and lower levels of expressiveness are associated with lower levels of likability and worse social judgments for autistic people. However, in this study, expressivity was measured subjectively and not objectively. What does seem to be clear is that autistic people's facial expressions seem to be difficult for other people to interpret, and that autistic people report that their non-verbal behaviours are often misunderstood and misinterpreted by others. But with the exception of eye gaze, none of these studies have measured non-verbal behaviour in detail in an objective way, and that's the gap that my study seeks to fill. And also, so far, non-verbal behaviours haven't been related to social outcomes. So what do we know about these first impressions of autistic adults, these social judgments that autistic people experience? Previous research has shown that autistic people are rated less favourably by others, and that non-autistic people are less likely to want to interact with autistic people in the future. And it seems like these negative social evaluations are driven by visual cues and not the content of what is being said. So it's important to look at the non-verbal behaviours being produced during social interactions to see if there are differences that could be contributing to these negative social judgments. And why is all of this important for autistic people? Why am I doing this study? I think if we can better understand autistic people's non-verbal communication differences and how this might relate to how autistic people are judged and their social outcomes, we could potentially reduce the misunderstandings that autistic people experience. We could improve autistic people's chances of success at job interviews, and we could reduce the isolation and social disadvantages that autistic people experience. So moving on to my study, just to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing in my research. In this research, I've recruited autistic and non-autistic participants to 3 types of dyads. I have 24 autistic matched dyads, that's where both participants are autistic. I've got 19 non-autistic matched dyads, that's where both participants are non-autistic. And I've got 23 dyads where the neurotype is mixed, where one participant is autistic and 1 participant is non-autistic. All participants completed the 14-item abbreviated Ritvo Autism and Asperger Diagnostic Scale of Autistic Traits. And out of the 71 autistic participants, 35 self-identified, and self-identifying autistic participants were included if their scores on the RADS-14 were 14 or above. And 14 or above is the threshold that is typically associated with being autistic. The remaining 36 autistic participants were formally diagnosed. I recruited my participants through Prolific. So if you haven't come across Prolific before, Prolific is a research recruitment platform or a research participation platform where people can sign up to participate in paid research studies. And this means that people can participate from all over the world. Something that was really important for my study is that participants were naive to the neurotype of their partner. I didn't want participants to try and guess the neurotype of their partner and try and guess whether their partner was autistic or not, because we know that sometimes non-autistic people can change their behaviour if they think they're interacting with an autistic person. And I also didn't want there to be any in-group, out-group effects that might affect behaviour. So participants knew that the study was about neurodiversity and social interactions, but they didn't know that I was particularly looking at neurotype match between autistic and non-autistic participants. And in this study, each dyad had a 3-minute get to know you conversation. So each participant only interacted with one other participant. And when I introduced them on the screen, I just said to them, have a conversation, get to know each other. I'm going to turn my camera and microphone off, so this conversation is just between the two of you. And off they went. And what I'm interested in, or the sorts of things that I'm looking at, are first impressions. So first impressions, things like how much did you like your partner? How awkward do you think your partner was? How trustworthy do you think they are? How much would you like to hang out with them again in the future? So these self-report measures were taken after the interaction. I've also been coding the facial behaviour using the facial action coding system, FACS. And FACS is a really great system for coding behaviour, coding facial behaviour. It's objective, it's comprehensive, and it measures individual discrete muscle movements that are coded as action units. So you can see in this picture on the right hand side from Waller et al. 2022, we've got some discrete action units, AUs, that are visible in this picture. And this means that I'm not ascribing any meaning to facial behaviours, I'm just describing them in a very objective way. So what we might describe as a face that is smiling quite informally, in FACS, we would describe all of the individual muscle movements that are being used to produce that smile, both with the mouth and elsewhere on the face. And other non-verbal behaviours were coded using the ethological coding system for interviews by Troisi. And this codes behaviours like head nodding, head shaking, shrugging, and these were coded manually with reliability coding between a number of coders. And this was adapted for use on video calls. So I'm going to show you a few examples of some of these behaviours now. So included in some of the behaviours that I coded as part of the ecological coding scheme for interviews were displacement behaviours, behaviours that are often associated with displaying stress or anxiety. Face touching is one of these. So here is a short video clip of somebody showing a face touching behaviour. So we can see there, it's just a little face scratch. Another example of a displacement behaviour that I coded is hair grooming. So running the hands through the hair, touching the hair. Again, just another short video clip of this. We can see the participant running their hand through their hair and touching their ear. And I also coded looking away. So the amount of time and how often participants looked away from their partner. And this was coded manually, and it's quite difficult to tell where somebody is looking in a video call because cameras can be positioned in all different locations. For example, right now, you can't tell exactly where I'm looking because I'm not necessarily looking at where the camera is. So we had to judge when participants were looking at the partner and where that was, and use that as our baseline. But me and the other coders had a good degree of inter-rater reliability, so we're quite confident that we were able to do that successfully. And we can see an example here of this participant looking down and then looking to the side. So we coded looking away as any instance where the participant either turned their head fully away from the screen, looked down, looked up, or just looked away with their eyes, whether that's to the side or up or down, even if their head didn't move. So here is an example of someone looking away and looking to the side. There we go. I'll show you that again because it's very quick. So looking down and then looking to the side. And an example of AU12, which is this smiling movement here. It's called lip corner puller, where the corners of the lips are pulled upwards into a smile. So this is an example of smiling behaviour that has been recorded. And facial behaviours, such as AU12 and smiling, have been automatically coded using OpenFace. So onto the results now. I'm first going to talk about smiling. We've just seen that nice video as an example of AU12. I'm going to talk about AU12 or smile frequency. First of all, I think it's really interesting that I didn't notice any main effective neurotype. So autistic and non-autistic participants both smiled with about the same frequency. I also want to mention on my graphs, you'll see at the bottom, the label says actor neurotype. That doesn't mean that any of the participants were actors. All participants were genuine participants. All I mean is that's a way to discern the person who's doing the smiling is the actor, or the person who is receiving the judgments is the actor. So it's just a way of discriminating between one participant and their partner. So there was no effective neurotype on smiling frequency. Autistic and non-autistic participants smiled at about the same frequency overall. But there was a significant interaction between actor and partner neurotype with a significance level of 0.029. And you can see in this graph here that non-autistic participants smiled less often at autistic partners. So the orange box are the autistic partners, and we can see that the non-autistic actors smile less frequently at autistic partners compared to the non-autistic partners who are in the blue box. If we look at autistic actors smile with about the same frequency at both autistic and non-autistic partners. So autistic actors' smiling behaviour seems to be the same regardless of whether they're paired with someone of the same neurotype or a different neurotype. And this pattern is similar when we look at smiling duration as well. So frequency was the number of instances, and duration is the amount of time that people are smiling for over the whole 3-minute interaction. Again, no main effect of neurotype on smiling duration. Autistic and non-autistic participants smiling for about the same amount of time. But when we look at the interaction between actor and partner neurotype, again, it seems that non-autistic actors are smiling for less time at autistic partners and smiling for longer at non-autistic partners. And again, autistic participants' behaviour doesn't seem to differ between having an autistic or a non-autistic partner. So moving on to looking at how long participants spent looking away from the screen. There was a significant effect of actor neurotype where autistic participants looked away from their partners for longer than non-autistic participants, for about 5 extra seconds for every minute of the interaction. And we're going to look at 2 social judgments now. The first we're going to look at is liking. How much did participants like each other? In these results, the actor is the person receiving the liking ratings. So we can see here that there isn't much difference between autistic and non-autistic liking ratings. These ratings were given on a visual analog scale from 0 to 100. There do seem to be some ceiling effects here where all participants were rated quite highly. But it does seem like non-autistic participants were liked slightly less overall from this graph. And when we look at the interaction between actor and partner neurotype, autistic actors were, autistic and non-autistic actors were liked about the same by their partners. So there wasn't much difference in liking by autistic and non-autistic partners. But autistic partners reported liking non-autistic actors less. So when an autistic person was partnered with a non-autistic person, they seemed to report that they liked their non-autistic partner less. And when we look at desire to hang out again in the future, so again, this was measured on a visual analog scale from 0 to 100. This is how much did the participant want to hang out with their partner again in the future. We can see no difference between autistic and non-autistic people overall in how much their partners wanted to hang out with them. But when we look at the interaction between actor and partner neurotype, we can see from this graph that non-autistic partners, so that's the blue box, reported less desire to want to hang out with autistic actors again in the future. And interestingly, the autistic partners, sorry, I just realized there's a typo on the slide, autistic partners, that is the orange box in the sort of right-hand side of this graph, autistic partners reported slightly more desire to hang out with non-autistic actors in the future. So there does seem to be some effect of partner neurotype across a lot of the variables that I've been looking at. So these results are preliminary, just to say that. So a summary of these preliminary findings so far. I'm kind of at the early stages of my analysis with this, but what this data seems to suggest at the moment is that autistic and non-autistic participants smiled about the same amount overall. But non-autistic participants smiled significantly less at autistic partners. And this is consistent with the double empathy problem. So these smiling differences are only observed in the cross-neurotype interactions in this study, and this suggests that non-autistic participants are changing their behaviour when interacting with autistic people, even when they don't know that their partner is autistic. And it also seems that autistic participants spent significantly more time looking away from their partners. And this differs from the findings of a previous video call study where eye gaze was similar in autistic and non-autistic participants in video calls. In this study, however, the video calls took place in a lab environment. So participants came into a lab, had an in-person interaction and a video call interaction. So it might be that the context or the environment within which the autistic person was in may have influenced eye gaze, potentially. The participants in my study were at home. So next steps, where am I going to go next with this? I would like to look at facial expressivity overall. So there is a measure of facial expressivity that Kavanagh et al. Devised in 2022 or reported in 2022, which combines overall duration and frequency and intensity and range of a variety of facial actions, of facial movements, to kind of combine into an overall facial expressivity score. So we know that facial expressivity is associated with liking, and I think it'd be interesting to find out in this study whether that is the case for both autistic and non-autistic people and in cross neurotype interactions. I'm also going to look at displacement behaviours, for example, face touching, hair grooming, because Whitehouse et al. In 2022 reported that high levels of displacement behaviours are associated with people being better liked. So again, it'd be interesting to see whether that is the case in this study. There is some evidence to suggest that on video calls, people are less stressed and anxious than in person. So we might expect to see fewer displacement behaviours on video calls. It'd be interesting to see whether displacement behaviours differ depending on the neurotype match of the partner. And again, how that corresponds with liking in same and mixed neurotype interactions. I'd also like to look at affiliative behaviours, so behaviours that show affiliation between partners, head nodding, head tilting, and how that might relate to liking ratings and social judgments. And at the moment, my analyses have looked at the outcomes in terms of the diagnostic group that participants belong to, whether they're autistic or non-autistic. I do think it would also be interesting to look at some of these outcome measures in relation to number of autistic traits or score of autistic traits on the RAD14, and how similar or how different those scores are within the dyads. So that's something that I'd be interested to look at in the future as well. And I just want to thank a number of people for their contributions to this research. Professor Beatrice Lopez from the University of Portsmouth, Holly Hayward, Nada Abbas for their help with this study, and James Bagger, Eleanor Lim, the FaceDiff team from Nottingham Trent University, Dr. Jill Prestige and Autism Hampshire's Experts by Experience for their help with piloting this study in particular. Also my funders, the ESRC South Coast Doctoral Training Partnership, the University of Portsmouth, and the FaceDiff team and FaceDiff project. Thank you very much. I do have some references here, so if you want to pause the recording and take a screenshot of these references, you are more than welcome. And that's probably a good point to end. Do you want me to stop sharing, Brian?
If you could stop sharing, that would be ideal. Yeah. Then everyone gets to see us in our full glory.
Lovely.
So I want to thank you, first of all, for absolutely fascinating talk. I made notes. And so having made notes, I'm going to give hopefully a very brief summary, which will also give folk who are here time to write their question either in the chat or in the question and answers. We've already got 6 or 7 questions coming through, so there's going to be enough time to do that. But I love the fact that you are doing research into something with real world impact. And when you and I were starting to talk at the beginning, I said, oh, you must have come up with this during COVID. And you said, no, I came up with this before COVID. And it just happens to be that the world has changed in the way that you are seeing it change and how you can go and measure stuff. I'm also very glad that I'm now doing this with a great big beard, because now you can't see the little sort of bits that go on down there. I've become incredibly aware of it.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, as soon as you start talking to people about it, everyone becomes very aware of their facial behaviours and they're touching their faces.
I'm not going to go robot. I also like the fact that actually if I stare off into the distance, it's because my neurodivergent buddies can pick me up. I like that. Just because my profile is brilliant. That's the only reason. So you started off with the double empathy problem and this sort of discord of keying that happens and looking at the whole function of neurotype matching in particular, and when it comes to non-verbal communication. I was a little bit, I did a big grin when you were talking about rapport and closeness. I hadn't realized the researcher was called Tickle. Oh, That's just brilliant.
Brilliant
If I
name.
had a surname like that, I would be looking at closeness
You'd
too.
be looking at closeness and
Yeah.
rapport. Yeah.
So the thing that you said that actually I kind of didn't know, and now I really do know, is that studies before your stuff have not been objective and they've not been outcome focused. And to actually do this big job of reducing misunderstanding, we need research like yours coming forward, and to do it by coding faces. And doing face touching. I'm now holding my notes really.
Don't touch your face.
I moisturised particularly.
I'm a chronic hair toucher and hair curler as well.
And
so.
the fact that you measure lip corners, I'm just thinking I'm at a distinct advantage here. It's brilliant.
Well, do you know what? What I haven't looked at is how people, social outcomes for people with beards and facial expressions.
We twiddle them. We do the whole moustache thing halfway through.
I need to look into this now. It's not a side quest.
But then, and this is the bit that I really loved, when you started looking at smiling frequency, you found that there was no significant difference between the two groups straight out. It was only intra-group did you find stuff.
Yeah.
And the fact that not autistic folk, they're the ones that aren't particularly smiley. The autistic folk are smilier. Isn't that just amazing?
Or at least kind of consistent, regardless of who their partner is.
Yeah. They're equal opportunity smilers. Isn't that just a brilliant thing? And then that looking away, you started talking about the contextualization of it. And yes, maybe this is a hill that I will die on. The autistic folk in my life are better interior decorators. And so you're going to get more interesting things in their rooms than the neurotypical folk. So
I think that's a very good point.
Incredible sense of style going on there.
Yes.
Then you started the whole linking, not linking, the linking to liking. And actually, it did seem, again, that the autistic folk are more free and easy with liking. It was the neurotypicals that seem to be a little bit more reticent, the ones who hold the power. And that's just a finding that backs up the lived experience of so many people, and something that potentially, by making it known, we can actually change the hearts of more people. Actually, if the majority is told you're not likable, they're going to try incredibly hard to be likable. Bless them. Then it goes on to the whole idea of hanging out, and this whole I get this story so often, the almost automatic tribalization, and this is going to turn up in some of the questions along the side, how autistic folk use their somebody called it the ND radar. I've always thought of it, or been told to think of it as the spectrometer. Just from
I like that.
Good word, and it comes straight from Ghostbusters. And it's how the like creates rapport with like, and how groups can come together. And I think getting rid of geography by doing this thing virtually is an amazing step forward for our society as a whole. Lastly, you talked about the sort of future things you want to look at, the whole idea of stress or affiliation. And I just want to thank you. That was a lovely talk. It's got me thinking. It's got, I can just see it flicking down the side. I'm going to have to go through the chat with a fine-tooth comb.
We're talking about the ORDAR, the ND, I call it the
ADAR.
It's a thing.
Neurospicy radar, absolutely a thing. Equal opportunity smilers. Thank you, Katie. I love that phrase.
I don't know if I can say, if anecdotally, obviously I knew the neurotype of the participants interacting, and anecdotally, it did seem clear to me, there was a noticeable difference in the interactions between autistic same neurotype interactions and mixed neurotype interactions.
I want to thank you ever so much for this. It's been elucidating, it's been inspiring, and you are just a lovely person to have a video conversation with.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So lovely.
It's been lovely.
I don't even have to engage the twinkle.
It's just
thank you ever so much.
Genuinely there.
We have so many people saying thank you in the text.
Thank you.
We've had loads of people with us. This is going to go up on YouTube in the next week or so. Hopefully, if you can join us, we are next meeting for a Cray webinar on June the 10th. I don't have the information for it to go out there yet. You can come to the Cray website. We'll also put it out on our socials. Come and join us. We do enjoy these conversations. Thank you all ever so much. Have yourselves a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.